this brings us to the last tutorial on the Twitter API this week, where we have already talked about how to get a tweet given an ID, and we looked into the details of what all information which is returned every time you look at a tweet from the Twitter API. We looked at how to search through past tweets, and we also looked at how to stream the currently happening tweets. However, there are a lot of other endpoints on Twitter API. However, there are a lot of other endpoints on the Twitter API which can be equally useful. In this tutorial, we go through and discuss through all of them. These specifically move around that once you have all the information about a given tweet, how can we get information about a specific user? How can we get a timeline of a specific user? People who are following this user, people who this user follows, who retweeted, and all this information. All this information is equally easily accessible through Twitter API, and we're going to see some of those examples in this specific tutorial. Just like every time, we start with importing TweeP and all our keys, and we do our authentication. Since this is not the streaming API, the authentication would happen as we saw in our first two tutorials, which is using the OAuth handler. We authenticate successfully. So let's try to look at a specific tweet and structure based on that tweet. So this is one of the tweets which was done by Professor PK, which I have collected previously. This also gives us a good example of once we have saved all the tweets which we have looked at in past in JSON. How do we load them back into Python to be able to handle? Because we saved all of them as JSON files, you can again use the JSON library to just load them up back. So you again open that file. In my case, this was tweet_pk.json. This time I open this file in a read mode, and then I use json.load to be able to load this again in tweet. And as I do it, we again see all the information which we saw in the past, which we downloaded in the past. All this information is still available in the same format. Okay. So this was the tweet he mentioned. This was the ID of the tweet. So let's start by looking at, okay, number of retweets and number of favorites he received on this specific tweet. And as we discussed in our first tutorial, there are retweet count and favorite count as keys in the data which we download, which have this integer information. However, this only tells us that how many number of retweets he received, which is 3. What if I'm interested in who are the people who retweeted it? This can be interesting because let's say you have a large corpus of tweets done by somebody or done by multiple people. You can actually get information about who all has retweeted them, and you can make a complex graph out of them where every node is a tweet or a user, and every time somebody retweets somebody else tweet, it becomes an edge in the graph, and that can be used to analyze some interesting properties of this graph theoretically. And to be able to do that, again, TweeP gives us very nice functions which wrap all the complexity of Twitter API inside those functions and make it very Pythonic to be called. It's called api.getRetweetersID, which is which is that it would return the ID of all the people who retweeted a specific tweet. And what is that specific tweet? For that, I would need to provide ID of the tweet I'm looking to retweeters for. So because tweet right now holds this specific tweet by Professor PK, which we are analyzing, I take ID of this specific tweet and ask it to return me IDs of all the people who have retweeted this tweet. And if I run this, as you can see, this returned me 3 IDs because only 3 people retweeted it. If there were more people, it would return more IDs. But essentially, these are the IDs of all the users, the unique Twitter user IDs of all the users who have retweeted this specific tweet. And now this information can be further used to collect more information about these specific users. Right now we have this user ID, but let's say I wanna take the first retweeter, which is this Twitter ID, and I want to get more information about the user, all the information about this user. So now I can use a different endpoint called get user, which given a Twitter user ID, you can use this function to get all the information about that specific user. So we make a call to the API here, which is as simple as calling a function in TweetP, and retweeter profile would have all the information about this user. And as we can see this, so we get all the information about this specific user, which is again their ID, their name, their screen name, their location if they have disclosed it. And it would have a lot of information about that, meta information about this user. So for example, number of followers they have, as you can see here, number of friends somebody has, at what point the profile was created, number of favorites they have had, number of status counts tells you number of tweets they have done in the entire history of their Twitter. And again, information about what is their background color, what is their profile picture, what is their banner picture, and all that information. So it's interesting to see, if you look at, we started with a structure where we started with taking a specific tweet. We looked at how many people have retweeted that tweet. We found out the specific IDs of who all have retweeted those tweets using get retweeters ID, and then once we have IDs of the retweeters, we get all the profile information of a specific user, okay, which is done using get user and providing the ID of that user specifically. But now let's look at, once you have this user, and as we saw that they have multiple followers and friends on their profile, 370 and 693 in this particular case, can we get information of who these followers are or who these friends are? So let's try to do this on profile of PK himself. So this is the unique ID of PK's profile. We first, let's get the user information of PK's profile, which gave us all this information, as you can see. And here we can see that he has 5,338 followers, 360 friends, and he has done total 4,434 tweets in his history, and of course all the information about image and everything. Now I want to look at all the people who, IDs of all the people who follow PK, and for that I can do get follower IDs. And as I do get follower ID and provide the user ID of PK to this function, when I run this function, it would again make a call to Twitter API, and it would return me a list of all the people, all the IDs of all the people who follow PK. And as you can see, it's 5,000. So by default, because of Twitter API rate limit, the size of this list is limited to 5,000. And as you can see, I'm printing the first 10 here, and these are Twitter IDs. So now we, given user ID of a Twitter user, we can use get follower IDs to get all the people who follow this person on Twitter. Okay, and that is as simple as calling get followers ID. Moving on. One last interesting thing which you can do is, now that you have this user, you want to pull out all the tweets which is done by this user specifically. So now you want to get all the past tweets. However, the filter here is the user itself. For that, there is a special function in TweetP, which is called user timeline, which is, again, you just called api.user timeline. You provide the ID of that user, and if you run this, it would return all the tweets which are done by this user. So here I'm going through all the tweets again and only printing the text of that tweet. However, don't forget that the information we receive is the information which is received is the complete and not only the tweet text. So I can go for any element in this tweet, any element in this list. I can go and do underscores JSON, and I would see all the information which we saw in the first tutorial. However, here for purposes of demonstration, I am only printing the text of them. text of all the tweets which have been done by PK. So let's do a recap. We looked at that given multiple different useful endpoints which are present on Twitter API. For example, given a tweet, we can find that number of retweets and number of favorites they have received. From there, we can go and get who are or all the people who have retweeted them. Then from that we can take this user ID and we can find the information about the entire user information about this specific user. So their screen name, where are they from, how many tweets and followers and following they have. Once we have that, we can get a list of their followers themselves using the get follower IDs method. And once we have a list of followers, we can snowball this further, that we can get information about these specific users. Or we can also say that, okay, for this specific user, now I want to get all the tweets which are done by this user. And we can do that using calling the .user_timeline function, and it would give us all the tweets which are done by this user. So as you can see, there are these multiple endpoints which can connect with each other in a sequence of actions which can give you very powerful data. So imagine a situation like where we started with a search API or a stream API where we were filtering all the data about Delhi winters. It gave us a bunch of tweets. For all of these tweets, we can get the retweets and favorites of who all did retweeted or favorited them. From those user IDs, we can get their information, their user information, who are the people who follow them, and timelines of all the people in this user profile. And you can have an entire profile graph of who are the people who tweeted about Delhi winters, who are the people who retweeted it, what all other things they have tweeted about, and a lot of rich analysis can come from this raw data. By cascading different endpoints which are available on Twitter API and essentially putting them together in different sequences. In what sequence to put them together would depend on what kind of data you would want to collect. This one sequence which we discussed here is just a demonstration. You can add more parts or remove some parts of it based on what kind of data collection you are doing and what is the end analysis which you want to achieve. Yes. With this, we come to an end of our Twitter API. With this, we come to an end of our Twitter API tutorials. We talked about from the very start how to get information of a specific tweet using one ID, what all information is returned. Now that we know how to get information about one very specific tweet, it is not always possible to get a specific tweet ID. So we looked at the search, we looked at the streaming API, and finally in the last tutorial, we looked at some other endpoints like how can you get who are the people who retweeted it, how can you get information about those users and their history of timelines.